Good evening. Sorry for the delay there with starting. We had a couple of technical problems, but hello and welcome to this week's England Rugby Tuesday training webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm David Fraser from the England Rugby Game Development Team, and tonight's topic is all things referee positioning. Delivering the webinar tonight is Match Official Development Manager from England Rugby, Michael Patz, and we're delighted that professional referees Sara and Luke Pearce can join us. If you're having any connectivity issues during the session, please don't refresh your browser. That can cause more problems than it solves. The advice is to try a different web browser if you can, or a different device if you've got one to hand. Thanks to all of those of you who have already submitted questions. We'll be putting those to Sara and Luke during the session. And as some of you have already, there's an option for you to add more questions as the session goes on, and we'll answer as many as we can. The webinar should last about 60 minutes, and at the end we'll let you know how you can listen back on demand and keep the conversation going. So with that, I'll hand over to Michael.
Thank you, David. Clearly my face is made for radio, so my webcam is hiding me this evening, which is a pleasure for everyone else concerned. Guys, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us on such a beautiful evening down in the southwest, as you both are, I know. Coxie, if I can come to you first, just a bit of an update, mate, if I can, of what you've been up to, studying, gardening, anything exciting?
Yeah, so I have been studying. I'm actually doing a university course at the moment, studying for a master's. So that's keeping me busy. So I've had a couple of days off that. And then I've just been out exercising and getting out on my bike as much as possible.
Awesome. Brilliant. Okay. Luke, I know you're slightly different. I could hear the young lady in the background earlier. So how's it going with yourselves down there?
Just to clarify, that wasn't my wife, that's the baby. Yeah, dog is enjoying himself, having lots of walks, enjoying being out on the bike. The weather's great, but itching to get back to it now. Hopefully we can get back to it sooner rather than later. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
So just looking at the themes for this evening, guys, just we want to be able to interact with everyone who's online. So really pleased, as Dave was saying, about the questions we've had in pre this evening, and also the ones we can see coming in on the chat log. But the themes we're going to cover off around some of the tackle area, some of the breakdown, a bit around open play, around the goal line, and then some sevens. So really just to pick your brains, Luke, just from the point of view of, from a positioning perspective, how do you sort of practice that out of game time? What's your your way you sort of pick up things out of actual game?
So yeah, I think it's very difficult, a theme of positioning really to get across, especially on a webinar. Everyone will have their own favourite and unique positions when they referee, and there isn't a right or wrong. There's nothing that's good or bad. How we practice them is, my main concern with positioning is twofold really. First of all, not to be in the way. Which I'm sure we'll see shortly. And secondly is the importance, especially at the top end, is the importance of accuracy of decision making. And if you're in the wrong place and you lose sight of the ball, the chances of getting that accurate decision obviously reduce significantly. Obviously, accuracy is important as you go down the levels, but it's even more important to get into a position where you can actually sustain 80 minutes of doing that. There's no point going out like a bull out of the gate for the first 10 minutes and then dying a death and not being able to survive the next 70. So it's all individual, it's all unique, and we try and practice it by building into our fitness programs, into our plans of running around a pitch with 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. But again, it's very hard to practice until you're in that game environment, and it will certainly prove a challenge when we do start back, hopefully. Like I say, sooner rather than later, that you might see a few of us being bumped out of the way because it's something that you can't really practice a whole lot for.
No. And Sara, coming to you if I can, obviously you with your sevens and then transitioning into 15s, etc. How do you make that sort of difference? I know there's a whole lot more players on the pitch, but just psychologically, how do you sort of build yourself up for that?
Yeah, so a lot of it is evolved around some analysis that I do after I've done sevens tournaments. So just to kind of almost get my eye back into the 15s game, and like Luke, it's all to do with training. So just changing the training up a little bit and going into the kind of looking at obviously there is more players on the pitch. I don't want to get in the way, and there's also a lot longer time that I've got to be on that pitch versus a sevens game and 15. So I try and kind of work around those, but a lot of it is to do with the kind of analysis really, and then just getting back out there again. Like Lou said, it's very difficult to practice that when you're not in a game scenario, because a game throws up lots of different areas that you've got to look at and adjust to. Yep. So just getting back out there and getting into games, and sometimes I'll kind of drop down a couple of levels to get some game time in and just practice those things before I go back into the higher level stuff.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. There's a really good tip there around that idea of trying to get yourself back into it by using other games that you can do. Luke's already alluded to it. We're going to go to our first video of the evening. Thankfully, some of his colleagues came forward with numerous clips of Luke and his positioning. Unfortunately, Sarah, no one found any of you getting in the way, but we'll have a look at the video and just see what happens here.
Oh no. Hold on. Yeah, I know.
Oh, you're going to need stitches, mate.
Ready?
Yeah, you're going to need stitches. What would you do?
So, Luke, just coming to you first, if I may. It was obviously a wee while ago, but how is the scar? How are you doing?
Doing all right, it's still there. One of the funniest parts about that whole incident, it was between Christmas and New Year. So obviously I couldn't enjoy myself like most of us normally try to in that time of year. Yeah. And Spreaders, who might be on the call, was actually there watching me as my assessor that day. And after about 2 minutes, this incident happened. I got carted off to have some stitches. And I said, no, we'll be fine. I'll go back on. And he said, no chance. You're not going back on. You knocked your head. So I got back into the change room, fuming that I've just wasted the Christmas week. Kicked the fridge in the changing room, stubbed my toe, so barely could walk, let alone have blood from my eyes. So
dear.
I can reflect back on that.
No. I think you number 4 the following day, didn't you? Did you? Was it the following day or the day after that?
It was, yeah, that London Irish. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. You obviously a worthy stand-in for young Smalley then, in case he went down with something. So.
It was always a likelihood with Smalley. He had a tendency to come off when games got tight, which was very strange.
Yeah. Obviously, Sarah, just looking there, we saw the second clip there of Adam Leal. Luke's clip was a wee while ago. I know from a sort of conditioning perspective, you guys do a lot of work now, but I take it you're not looking to take out many more number 10s?
No, I think there are some examples. I think there's one of Barnsley as well, taking out a Saracens player at the back of a line out. So I think we've all done it, and there definitely are some clips of me. If it's not kind of getting mixed in with a ruck, it's getting in the way of players, unfortunately. And sometimes you can't help that. You can't help a player taking a certain line and you taking that same line. And we aren't experts at sidestepping, so unfortunately we do get in the path of them. So I think, you can train as much as you like, but you're just going to get in the way sometimes. It's just trying to stay out the way as much as possible.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that. We'll go to the first clip this evening. A lot of questions early doors from new referees who are saying they're being told where to stand, particularly at the tackle. And using the chariot position, and we'll perhaps discuss the chariot position as after we've watched the clip as a default. So what I'd like to do is just take us through the clip first, and then just come back to you guys with some sort of follow-up questions, if I may, to try and help our new referees. So I've lost the slide there. Have you guys got the slide still?
Yeah.
So sorry about that. Just so obviously we saw Latoya there refereeing when she was new to the game, and I say just Luke, if I can come to you first, just around that sort of being told by an assessor to use the chariot position. Can you just sort of explore what that means at sort of the different levels?
Yeah, so I can see a number of the questions that are coming in are involving what assessors advise, and everyone tries to help out with that positioning thing. Again, I go back to that unique individual thing with positioning. Mm-hmm. For me, it's never about losing sight of the ball, and if I can do that wherever I stand, I give my best chance to make the correct decision for the game. As you can see with Latoya, with this whole chariot positioning stuff, that the idea of it is to be able to give you that vision of the ball directly, but also to be in a position to move to either side of that ruck when the ball appears. Now, obviously, the higher level you go up through rugby, that becomes a bit more predictable. You know, teams will often play one way, and then come back. So that eliminates that position, that need to be in that chariot position. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. The only issue it does give you and cause is that you end up being 3 or 4 meters then further back. And someone who is not known for his sprinting, if I end up 3 or 4 meters behind the 9 before the ball has been passed, I don't put myself in the best position then for if that line break is made. So again, individual, it's best position possible, but that's what we mean when we talk about this chariot position, as you can see in a number of these clips.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. And anything else, Sarah, just thinking about from your perspective, when you started refereeing, any sort of tips and advice you got from the sort of developers and assessors?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're lucky at the moment, myself and Luke, operate in a world where we have 2 assistant referees, and in this clip as well, Latoya is very lucky to have the same that are wired up to her. So that takes a little bit of the pressure off with regards to managing that back line. When you take those out of the equation, so you no longer have assistant referees, there are lots of other things that you're looking at. So you're looking at the offside line with the kind of guys in defence and what have you. So that movement becomes paramount. And I found when I was starting out that I just sit myself quite close to what I'd call the A and B pillar, which is the kind of 2 guards that are quite close to that ruck, to be able to manage them, because I found that managing those 2 players then tended to manage everybody else in the back line, because they'd set themselves off that person. Mm-hmm. And I still do that to this day as well, to a point. But I personally like to stand quite close to the ruck, which is again personal choice. I don't often find myself in the chariot position as much as some other referees, and I think it's about personal preference. And sometimes, though, the chariot position can really help and really kind of offload some of the stress of the movements and things. But like Luke said, it's about finding that ball and then being able to follow wherever you need to follow just after that. So I think it differs. I think in the community game, I'd probably use it less when I don't have assistant referees, but when I do have assistant referees, I can kind of pivot around and use that position to my advantage, really.
Okay, brilliant. And just talking about that movement, with the next clip we'll see some of that movement in action, and then we can come back to it.
We can confirm, always bursting through there is the captain, BG. There's Brayley onto Allen there, driving the ball forward is Negri. We can confirm that McNichol has gone for a head injury assessment, so he could well be back. We have a turnover there, which I'm
clearly a Six Nations international with yourself refereeing it, Luke, relatively early in the game. Did you have any sort of set determination of how you were going to be sort of positioning yourself and refereeing that aspect of it?
Yes, and I think this is where positioning gets a bit more interesting, because going into certain games that which areas of the game hopefully are going to be more competitive than others. So I knew going into this in a game like Wales-Italy that the breakdown is really important. Both teams compete really hard. Both have got very good back row players, which means that I've got to try and get to the breakdown earlier to make sure I can see a clear release. I know that they're not going to give me the opportunity just to not go on the ball, which makes my life a lot easier. Yep. So I knew going into this that especially at early doors, that the penalties had to be on the money. So my priority was trying not to lose the ball. And Sarah's right when we speak about offside lines, and I see a couple of questions about it is difficult lower down the levels because you've got far more to look at. But what I would say is the importance of not losing sight of that ball. If you lose sight of that ball, you're going to give something that is probably going to be wrong, very small chance of getting it right. And, yes, okay, offside lines are very important, but who really cares about the offside line when you've given the ball to the wrong team through a penalty? And that was my priority going into this.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, just when you're sort of looking at this, what sort of things are you picking up when you're watching what Luke's up to? What's your sort of view of that?
Yeah, same sort of thing, really. So I actually did the Wales-Italy game the day after Luke, but the female game. Mm-hmm. And the two teams work quite similarly as well, is that there's going to be a lot of competition around the breakdown. So you need to make sure that you're finding that ball and you're making sure that you're giving the ball to the right team and being fair with that. So it's very similar to what Luke was saying, is just getting yourself in that right position, that kind of circulation around the breakdown to make sure that you are being equitable with any of the decisions that you're given.
Yeah, the one thing I was noticing from that clip, Luke, and just was the sort of the perpetual motion, if you like, until you got to a point where you were focused at the end there. You didn't stop moving. You kept transitioning. What triggers do you use to keep yourself doing that, or is that just sort of a muscle memory type idea?
I think it's just, I personally find it the quicker the game, the harder it is to become too static. If you become static, you just lose, you get sort of far behind play. The slower the game, the more rigid you'll become, because you have the opportunity to stand still more. So I think it's kind of ingrained from doing a few quicker games in the past. But one thing I did forget to mention is just, again, the individuality with positioning, but the importance on being in a position where players think you give a credible decision. Not easy at times when we're broken, we've got to sprint 80 meters to try and get to a breakdown. But if we're in a position where the players look up, and you see this example here where the Welsh guy is on the ball, I give the penalty slightly too late here, because by the time I'm doing it, the scrum half's got the ball in his hands, but people can see that I'm focused on the ball. If I'm anywhere else here, if I'm this side of the ruck, or I'm looking at the offside line and then give a holding on penalty, the Italian players look at me and just think, well, not quite sure he's got that right. And again, they lose that bit of faith in you early on, makes your life very harder as the game flows on. So that's the most important thing, especially irrelevant of what level you referee at, is being in that position to give a credible decision. Because the players will then follow you, and everywhere else in the game, as we all know, the game then becomes a lot easier to take the players with you. But if they're working against you from minute 11, it will be a long day of
Absolutely. Just Dave, if I can come to you, just from a questions point of view, have we got any other questions coming in around sort of tackle and such like?
Yeah, I think Sarah and Luke have picked up on quite a bit of it. People asking about differences between the professional community game and how you use ARs. But one from Gary in Durham about speed. How important is speed to support your positioning?
Can I come to you on that one, Sarah?
Well, in Lukey's case, I think it might be a bit different. But
that's what I was asking you.
No, I think speed is very important. So you're looking to transition as quickly as possible, and for as much as kind of Luke says that he isn't renowned for his speed, he does move very, very well around the pitch, and so that's what we try and aim for is get into those breakdowns, being the kind of second, third person to get there, and again identifying that ball. Identifying the best position for you to be around that ruck situation and to then give a credible decision. So I'd say yes, that not only for the breakaways, but for kind of transitioning from ruck to ruck, phase to phase, you definitely need to have a little bit of speed about you and a little bit of takeoff when you do that. So keeping on your toes and keep moving, really.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. Luke, I was discussing earlier the fact that I went for my version of a run today, which is probably a whole lot slower than yours. I can guarantee that. So just from your point of view, mate, what's your sort of take on it?
Yeah, for what you don't get in speed, you get more experience and you get to be in the right position at the right time, hopefully. We'll all, as referees, be in the position where we think the ball is going somewhere. You try and take a shortcut, and just as you do it, it's intercepted, or the player changes his mind and goes the other way, and then you're further behind. So it's just trying to reading the game between getting the right position and always just trying to keep moving. And that's the hardest part. And, when I go to Cullompton, my local club down here, And I watched some of the lads and some of the female referees who were giving it their all. And, some of them running in treacle during the deepest, darkest of February, and it's not easy. So we're not sat on here making that it's simple and everyone keeps moving and run on carpet like you do in Cardiff. We understand that it's difficult at times, but it's just trying to keep on top of that and keep moving. So again, I go reiterate that player credibility thing. And if the players believe what you're doing is right, even if it is or isn't, they don't really know anyway. Some of them, the crowd also believe it, and again, that makes your day a very lot easier.
Yeah. Okay. Dave, can I come back to you again? I think you've got another question.
Yeah, there was another good one. I think so. In matches where you do have ARs, are you having pre-match discussions about positioning and what their role is to support you in managing the tackle area, for example?
Luke, can I come to you on that?
Yeah, so each match is individual. We're going to go back to that point. You always raise certain things that you think you're going to get in that individual match. We operate at a level now where we work with same ARs pretty much week in, week out with our pod system. So you'll see once we start back up, whenever we do, hopefully in a few weeks, that people will be with the same referees. So we'll have a couple of referees with the same AR, and that enables us to get that teamwork to a level where we know and expect where we're all going to be at in a certain area of the game. Where we really try and hammer home and where we often get a lot of criticism, rightly so in the past, is that we got lazy around the in goal, which I know we'll come on to shortly, just because we have a TMO that we can try and sweep up. And our aim is to try and use the TMO as little as possible. So where we really try and work very hard with ARs and referees is trying to get in that best position. And where we don't want to be is stood next to each other, because if we're both stood next to each other and we still can't see the ball, then we're both going to look a bit silly. Whereas if we can get opposite and we still can't see it, well, that's so be it. But it's just trying to get us into that best position possible. Regarding breakdown and individual areas, it could be here all night, because it's so different to each referee and so different to each game. I would say the breakdown is primarily the referee's role, or whatever level you referee at. But it's just making sure those ARs are doing things that can aid the game rather than taking away from it.
Patsy, can I just touch on that point as well? Is that
Yeah, for sure.
Luke obviously operates within Premiership and internationally. Obviously, having worked with yourself as an AR as well,
I'm sorry.
it's slightly different in championships. So
Yeah.
we do kind of chop and change assistant referees quite a lot, which is probably more similar to what happens within the community game. So we do brief, I think, quite slightly differently, where from week to week you can be with different ARs, and you can go an entire season without seeing the same ARs throughout. So there is I would say I'd probably brief slightly differently to maybe what Luke would on a Premiership day, just because I've not seen these guys possibly before. I haven't seen them for a while, and just make sure that we're all on the same page. And like Luke says, the same sort of principles is that we want to be in the best possible positions to be able to, again, find the ball, to be able to be in credible positions. But there will be some other elements that I will introduce, just because there are different personnel, such as kind of what I'd be expecting on the day, what my mission statement is for the day, and what we want to try and achieve out the back of that.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can sort of echo that, Sarah, because as you say, we've worked together a few times, and it is interspersed with working with other referees. So it's important that we do establish those team boundaries and make sure, certainly my role as an AR, that I'm supporting whoever the referee is on the day to what they're asking us to do. So some really, really good tips there. Thank you. Just looking at the next slide, I think we've covered a lot of this. We've talked about getting there early. We've talked about our movement, and we've talked about that anticipation. I think that the thing that you were alluding to, Luke, around that player credibility, and Sarah sort of touched on at the end there, is around that presence and having that presence, whether it's physically or verbally. And again, how does that sort of work for you? What's your preference for sort of that communication, whether it's verbal or non-verbal, to create that presence?
Look, I think as a generic statement, the lower the level, I don't want to say the lower the level because that sounds like a demeaning, but the more local rugby you referee at, I would suggest that the more communication you're going to use to create that presence. Once you climb the ladder and you start dealing with players who know more what they're doing on the floor and they know more what they're doing at the breakdown, we haven't got to talk very much at all. And I think it's just getting that balance right between speaking too much, which I often do. It's part of how I referee, between speaking not enough and also making sure that we're trying to get the best out of what we can achieve from that game. If I run around shouting and screaming my head off and get no impact, well, there's no point in me doing it. But if I can stop or prevent one quick penalty because a player is on the ball for half a second, then I can justify that, and that's the reason why I'm speaking. So it's all very much dependent on how you want to operate, and you'll see that variance of referees throughout the Premiership, Championship, internationally. I think that's one thing that's unique about rugby compared to the likes of football or cricket or tennis. That's each referee is his own kind of character rather than this robotic system, because our game allows it.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. We've got going on to another clip now, which I hope sort of demonstrates that. And then, Sarah, I've got a couple of questions that I'll come to you after the clip, if that's okay. So I'll just go for the next one.
Space on this near side for Sharples and Hudson potentially to exploit.
Yeah, let's not do that, please.
Safety first is
Thank
the
you,
call.
Ryan. Competition.
Courtney Laws did well to cling on to that.
On the wrong side to see it.
Brother Owen on his way next
Ball's gone,
season.
fellas, let go.
Bigger, the no-look pass for Naira Voro. Gloucester read that and have dealt with it.
So clearly we've got Craig there and sort of a number of clips out of the game between Northampton and Gloucester. Sarah, just looking at the way he sort of creates that presence and has the odd word, it's around that time and space that he's able to create. Is there any tips that you can give the community guys around that?
Absolutely. What you'll find is that as you become more experienced in the game, you create more time for yourself. And sometimes you don't realise you are creating that time because you're right in the middle of it. And Craig transitions really nicely through the game and he moves very well along the pitch. So it's also kind of encompassing that side of things, is that once you get there, if you get there in plenty of time, you create that time for yourself, so you can have that communication with the players. And Craig just speaks exactly what it is that he wants to achieve out of that, and then the player does that, and we kind of move on. So it prevents that situation materialising into potentially a penalty or something that he has to then further manage. So it is like, again, it's just that movement around and getting there nice and early and having that short, sharp communication with players, and then kind of bringing yourself out of that, because like Luke says, the last thing you want to do is get into that white noise where you're saying something at every single breakdown and then the players start switching off, because it's human nature that once something keeps repeating itself over and over, if it isn't relevant anymore, we switch off to it and filter out what it is that we need to do. And especially under fatigue as well, is players then struggle further to kind of hear things and listen with a lot of information. So it's that short, sharp, this is what I want to do, and a bit of a call to action, if you like. I want you to do this and I want to prevent something from happening.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Luke, if I can come across to yourself, there's a question in from Chris Murphy, who's talking about the no ARs in most of the community game, and how long do you assess around that dwelling after the ball's available to the 9 before you set off from the breakdown to your next breakdown?
It's a really, really, really good question, actually, because the most important part that we play on the pitch is obviously safety. And what we can't guarantee through positioning is someone isn't going to stand up and lamp someone if there is history between the teams or if there are a lot of bodies on the floor. So it's having that understanding as a new referee that your job out there is to keep it safe. And if you do have that feeling of an undercurrent, or you do have that feeling that something is going on in the game, well, you may want to consider just holding back a bit more. Again, I go back to the point I first made. Yeah, accuracy is important decisions. You want to make sure that decisions are kind of right. But if you can, see what started some trouble on the floor, or just by being there and your presence can actually prevent someone doing something daft, well, that's even just as good a goal as well. So you've definitely got to have that consideration for players on the floor. We're lucky in the Premiership and Championship, we can just run off, and some of us need more of a head start than others. But, at those local levels, if you do just sprint off, it's all well and good that you might be next to the fullback when he catches it, but when you turn around, as we all will at some stage, and you see a all-in pushing and shoving contest, what you just hope it is, and you've got to try and get your tail between your legs and run back, well, you'll soon learn that sometimes it's best to sit back and catch the game up rather than be ahead of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of, Sarah, you mentioned earlier that it's that sort of preparation, I guess. Certainly, I referee locally now. Predominantly, I do sort of age grade rugby. That's my knees will let me do. But it is knowing the history between the teams and things. So
yeah, that can help, and sometimes the preparation will help you do that. I know personally, I like to prepare and look at both teams and kind of make sure that I've got points for the day to be focusing on. But there is a risk that you do then drop into too much preparation. So at the end of the day, we're out there to facilitate a game of rugby that happens in front of us. So it's really important that sometimes you can do all the background kind of looking and developing and seeing what's going on with the two teams. But at the end of the day, it might be a game that plays out in a completely different way to what you expected. So it goes back to the importance of just refereeing what's in front of you and managing what's in front of you. And more often than not, it's how you want to be treated is how you treat the players. And you get a great response from that. I know I personally have found that.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Just take us through to some. I think we've talked around this, and just to give a bit of structure to it. So we're sort of talking about getting there, so we can make those credible decisions. It's about that movement and trying to avoid getting static where we don't need to. Asking a question around that of what am I looking for? We've talked about that credibility, that presence, so adding that value, and then anticipating where next, and not all these things run concurrently. So I guess some of the questions that come in, Luca, around are there sort of from your perspective, are there perfect positions that you would take up at a scrum or something like a line out, which are more static, being set piece? What's your sort of take on those?
Yeah, I think this is a really good diagram and something that we all use, regardless of the level and how long you've been refereeing for. As you mentioned, Patsy, you don't necessarily follow this wheel round, but you take that example of the question you just asked. So if I know that I've got an issue at the scrum, well, I'm anticipating at the next scrum that I need to be on that side to try and solve the problem. It's unfair of me to try and sit it on my ARs to solve the problem, or even at real rugby level to not touch it at all and create more of a problem. So my presence, that could add value. I'm anticipating that I'm trying to solve the problem for the next time. And you look at, and I see the couple of questions regarding the line out as well. Like we'll all hear that being at the front, being at the back, wherever you want to stand is beneficial. It's totally individual, like I said at the start, but also it comes down to your body shape and body build. I'm not the tallest kind of guy, so there's not much point in me standing at the front of every line out when I'm dealing with players who are very, very tall and can tower over me even when they're lifted. So I've got to be at the back, and that's where, and I touched on the question from earlier on, that's where we might communicate with our team to make sure that in this scenario, I will be at the back of the line-out. I need you to look at X, Y, and Z at the front. You compare that to someone like Ben O'Keefe from New Zealand. Every international he referees, he'll referee the line-out from the front. And it just goes to show that irrelevant of your level or your experience, it changes and it's totally individual. But this flow chart as a new referee will definitely get you to consider what you're doing, especially during that game time when you're running around. And actually, when you find yourself running around like a headless chicken, which you will do numerous times, and we all do at various levels, is actually, what am I doing here? What am I looking here for? What am I sprinting around for? If you don't have to sprint around, is there much point in it? And it's just making sure that you're getting the right needs for that game.
Absolutely. No worries. There's a question, Sarah, if I can come to yourself, from Graham Smith from Norfolk, talking about in the community game that on a Saturday, say you might be refereeing an adult level 8 game, and then on a Sunday you might be doing an under 14s match. Under 14s, because of their very nature, are more unpredictable around where they'll go with the ball, etc. They don't necessarily play patterns. And it's how do you sort of adjust that to that inconsistency of play where you can't use a consistent positioning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to note that at any level there can be inconsistencies. So I've been in games before where you know, a championship side, you can predict that movement of play, and like Luke says, you know roughly what the teams are going to do. And then I've been in an A-League game potentially with players at a higher level that it's been completely unpredictable, and I found myself in spots where I didn't expect to be. So sometimes unpredictability of a game actually works in your favor to be able to build your experience and to be able to put yourself in those positions where it might not be the best possible position, but it's suited to that scenario that's happening in front of you. So I wouldn't worry too much about kind of the predictability of games. All games are unpredictable at times, and I'm sure Luke's got examples of the same sort of thing, but it's about you moving well enough and you trying to anticipate, maybe not necessarily actually anticipating exactly what happens, but just staying out of their way and letting that happen in front of you. So sometimes staying a couple of meters further back than what you would normally, just to allow them that little bit of room just to sporadically move around. And that's where you'll learn a heck of a lot versus sometimes a very structured game, because you've got other things to contend with, and you've got things that you've got to work out very quickly in a position that you're not comfortable with. And it's about sometimes being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being able to, I know it sounds a bit of a cliche, but it's kind of, so it's putting yourself in that position where you can see everything, but it might not be the most comfortable of positions, and just working that out. And it's a little bit hit and miss sometimes, but trial and error, and I think that's a majority of most kind of jobs and games, is just a little bit of trial and error and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just pick up on there's a question has come through from Rugby Club Luxembourg of all places. We've obviously gone really international this evening, and they're talking about the line out of where do you think is the best position. And I think, Luke, you've sort of answered that in so much as is what's right for you to see what you need to see.
Definitely. And, you know, it can change in a game. You go back to that slide that we're looking at the moment. If you know that in the first line-out, the line-out's very competitive and you're on your own out there, well, you may want to get to the front so you can see how competitive it's being and if everything's legal. So it will vary, it will change. It just depends on what you're working with. I mean, it's just being flexible and managing to change, not just sit in a position because you have done for years. It's changing that and making it more variable, so you're giving what the game needs rather than just being selfish and standing where you want to stand and you have done for years.
Okay, thanks, Luke. We'll go to another clip which takes us towards the goal line. Again, this is one from the Wales Italy game, Luke. So I'm going to come to you first after we watched it, but let's let the audience watch this, and then I'll ask you some questions around it.
Reece Webb. Nick Tompkins getting caught by Canna.
No hands, Blue!
Reece Webb. The surge forward coming from Moriarty. Tipperick. Up there to Brown. Reece Webb again. There's Corey Hill. 2 meters between Wales and a fifth point. Can they secure the full house on the opening afternoon of the Guinness Six Nations? It's a penalty advantage here to Wales. Reece Webb. North took a couple of grabs at it. He's so powerful though. He's got it down on the line.
So if we take you back to the game, Luke, we've got sort of 76 minutes on the clock. Wales 28-0 up, looking for a bonus point try. Can you just sort of talk through what your considerations were as we went through that phase?
Yeah, so you obviously have to have a game relevance of what you're doing, and like you say, at that time of the game, with Wales needing their fourth try for a bonus point, I wanted to make sure that I'm in the right position to try and see what's happening. And if we kind of ignore the fact at the moment that Alan Wynne-Jones potentially pulls his own player over, I wanted to ensure that I was where the ball was going to be, and even more important, again, that I knew that if I was going to give an offside penalty, me hanging back in that chariot position, I wasn't going to get that accurately enough. And it's having that awareness that once you're talking to players about the offside line and they keep on creeping, I can't just carry on talking to them. So again, that relates to the communication part as well. So it all blends into one, and it just goes back to that. That's that important point. At whatever level you're refereeing, is trying to be in the best position possible to give the best outcome for that situation. And this game would have got nothing from referring this to a TMO. It would have got nothing from then having a conversation and having a minute, 90 seconds out of the game where everyone saw the same replay time and time again. And that's where we've been criticised previously. So, at the top end, as much as we're trying to work hard to be in that best position possible, it just reiterates the importance of that, of the real rugby side of things, down at community level, where if a referee's in the best position possible to give that decision, it's fantastic. Imagine this at a local game where we're in behind, you're in the chariot position, you start to run around, and that player who's gone over the goal line on 76 minutes to win the game has grounded the ball, but by the time you get there, you can't see it because you're in the wrong position. All the attention, all the focus will be on you. You end up having a sequence of 5-meter scrums invariably, because that's what always happens whenever something difficult has happened in goal. And then all your pressure and all that hard work is then put back on yourself, all through just actually working that bit harder and having a kind of understanding of what might potentially happen here and where this play might end up. And in this position, we get lucky and we get a try and everyone walks away and everyone's kind of happy apart from the Italians. So it's having that understanding and that goal line importance of positioning. We can get away with it in field of play. We can chase a bit, we can retract a bit, but around in goal, it's just so important that we're in that right position to give a try or not give a try, because that's where games are won and lost. And that's what players want to do, isn't it? They want to win games or they want to score a try. So it's just being in that credible position.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Luke. Just Sarah, if I can come to you, we've got a question in from John Rook from Broughton Park, who's asking, at what point do you find yourself moving from the attacking side to behind the goal line? So it's making that transition. Are there any sort of triggers or tips that you can sort of advise John around of how you would make that decision and assess that?
Again, I think it's really important in finding where the ball is and putting yourself in that best possible position to see that grounding. Now, when the ball is herring towards the line with a couple of players attached to each other and like in Luke's scenario there, you've got to be able to kind of find that ball. And if you need to go digging for a couple of seconds, nobody minds that, but you've put yourself in the best possible position to try and find that ball. I personally, I don't use that position, but I think that probably comes down to more about my experience than it does actually to a preference. Okay. I have sometimes found myself in that position by accident, and it's lovely when a try is scored right at your feet, but it's not a conscious effort more often than not. So I think it's about finding where you're comfortable. Again, I personally don't feel comfortable in that position, but again, that's more down to my experience and the way in which I referee over it being right or wrong. And I think in this scenario, like Luke says, with regards to seeing that grounding, I think if you get it and it falls at your feet, fantastic. If you follow that in and you take a couple of seconds to find that ball, but you do find it, then even better. But you've got two sides. I personally don't have a trigger for getting in goal, other than the fact that it's herring towards the line and I've got to make sure I find it.
Yeah, and I think we've sort of described. There's a question in from Ryan, I think it is, who's asking around. What's the sort of the payoff of either missing a knock on or seeing the try? So you've got to make that decision at some point, haven't you? As you're describing there, Sarah.
Absolutely, you can't get everything, and unfortunately, unless you've got a TMO, you kind of. You're making that decision, and look, if you see the knock on, then obviously you've got to give it. But if you don't see that, then look, you can't be everywhere and see everything all the time. And so if it's a genuine mistake from the fact that you've just not seen it, I know personally I've done that before, and I've done it quite recently. But unfortunately it's part and parcel of being a referee, and it just comes with the job sometimes.
Absolutely. Just one question for you, Luke. We've got someone called Andrew Small from London who's asking a question around with the ball moving towards the goal line. What do you feel about being in goal with the ball coming towards you? What's your sort of viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it, but the timing is so important of when you go in goal. You go in goal too early, and then you miss something happening in the field of play, or someone makes a great tackle, pushes them backwards. It puts you in a very difficult position then to get the right decision, what's next up. And again, you go back to that importance of decisions being correct around that goal line. So that if you can predict it and you think actually on this occasion they're going to go for the line, it looks great because the ball lands at your feet. But you run the risk of missing something very important if you go there too early, and you just hope that your footwork can get you out of there pretty quickly, and that you're not in a second team pitch, deepest, darkest quarter in mud, where you end up on your face and in goal.
Yeah, I think some of it as well, just looking at as I sort of alluded to when we played the clip, Luke, is that you look at the time of the game, what's gone on before, the fatigue of the players, particularly the Italian players who haven't scored any points. So I guess that will, whether it's conscious or subconscious, will be there with you as well. So you would have read all that as the game has evolved in front of you, I take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's all individual, It's just I felt comfortable going in goal here, and I thought they would make the goal line, so that's where I went to give the best position possible. If I end up 2 meters behind here, it doesn't really matter as long as I get the right outcome. Where it does matter, as I said earlier, is if I'm further back here, and by the time I get around, the Italian guy's got his hand under the ball, well, then I'm going to look a bit of a fool for getting the wrong decision. So it's just making sure you're in that best position possible to give the right outcome. So that's all I feel it's about.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. We'll play another clip, which is goal line based, or in goal based, but it's from the Sevens arena. So, Sarah, I'm going to get you to sort of come in once we've watched the clip, if we may. So I'll just get the clip running.
Haslett looking for the runners off, but doesn't find them. The ball goes loose, and here come France. Marjorie Mayons, magnifique. Oh, it's a high tackle going in there. She's got the ball down. The try is good. Big high tackle coming in from Ivania Polite, and she is going to be heading off.
Tackle. Off you go.
Yellow card. Well, she's looking amazed. 2 minutes now for France to really make a difference in this contest.
When we thought this game couldn't get any more exciting, it definitely does. 7v6 now. What can France do to keep this momentum up? But just a big tackle from Drouin was what set this up, the reaction, and then to keep the ball alive. And Mayans has been absolutely sensational today. She used her strength, she got over that line regardless of the tackle from Polite. But the France have not given up now.
Well, Ivania.
So say if I can come to you, Sarah, because clearly it's a clip with you involved on this occasion. And again, if I give a bit of context around the game, it's a cup semi-final, so I guess you've been out there all weekend, as have the players. So the timing, the decisions you're having to make, etc. Just if you talk us through what your sort of processes were there, please.
Yeah, so I like to, you can see there, is I like to follow the players quite closely in when I can, and I knew at this point it was going to be quite vital, because I think the game finished with a full-length try for Australia to win, because France actually turned it around and turned it into them winning. So it's interesting. So when I do get in and I do follow them in, I've got to be careful that I don't get too close, because I could then get in the way of support players.
Right.
So I do sit myself back a little bit, and I do work out that I know to the left of me I'm the only person, so therefore I'm not going to get in the way of a support player immediately. But I can also see the high tackle from the Australian player, so that played a big factor, because if she didn't score that try from the French, I'd be giving a penalty try. So I've got to be in a realistic and credible position to be able to give that, and that's where the yellow card came afterwards. So then once I followed it in, I need to find the ball, and I need to find the ball quickly so that I can work out, has it been grounded? And if it has been grounded, then I can give the try. If it hasn't and it's been held up, then what's my next line of protocol? Well, that's going to be, I'm going to give the held up, but then I'm going to give a penalty try for, if it weren't for the act of foul play, would a try have been probable? Well, yes, in this instance it would have, because if the high tackle wasn't there, she probably wouldn't have been held up. But again, I've got to make sure that I'm in the best possible position to give that. So I can give a full picture, and I have the full picture to then determine what I'm going to do next. So that's exactly what happened. So I got in, I found the ball, I saw it on the ground, I gave the try, and therefore when everybody stands up, I put time off and I bin the Australian player.
Yeah, I mean, and fair play to you, Sarah, because the actual emotion that must be going through as well, the emotions that are running, because that was a fair old sprint in. As we know in sevens, you've got to be quick and as I say, the timing around that to have that presence of mind to work in that process that you've just described. Obviously, it takes a lot of practice, but also a lot of ability on your part. So
no, absolutely, it's one of those that. It's very important in sevens that you get accurate decisions because it can pivot a game. And we saw in that clip how quickly the ball got turned over from Australia to France. And then it gave France the opportunity to go in and score. Now, these are two of the best teams in the world. And the French ended up in the final of the World Cup as well. So you're playing with very fine margins when it comes to sevens. And we had been out there for a couple of days. And there is fatigue that plays a factor in all of this. And you do find yourself putting yourself in different positions, and so do the players put themselves in different positions based on their fatigue levels. So I had to make sure that even though we are getting to that point in the weekend and in the game, that we are getting fatigued, but we are going to have to keep working, and we're going to have to keep working very, very hard. And that in this clip paid dividends for me.
Brilliant, thank you. Luke, just a quick question has come in from Sam Cahill from NLD, and I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to think about this yet, but with the law amendment that's come through around Law 8 for the grounding against the posts, will that affect your movement around goal at the moment, or have you not had an opportunity to think about that yet, mate?
My personal view is it's fantastic. It's a real step forward for us, because trying to justify how players can work towards the goal line and not be defended is pretty hard to then referee, and it's hard to see when that ball's grounded. So will it affect my positioning? I don't think it will, because I never considered going in goal, because I was always then considering is it grounded on the base of that post. So I don't think it'll have a huge effect there. But what it will do, hopefully, is expand that game and make sure teams are scoring outside of that channel just by the post, because people want to see exciting rugby. Pick and goes, especially heading towards that post, tend to get a bit boring after a while, I think, for some viewers. So hopefully it'll have the correct, it'll have a positive impact for rugby and make it easy to referee as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're into questions. I know, Dave, I think you've got a couple of questions for the guys.
Yeah, there's a couple of good sort of left field questions. So the first one, have you given any thought to, and this is from James in Matlock, have you given any thought to, instead of having ARs, having two referees, like a basketball or netball situation where you have perhaps a trail and lead referee? How would that help or hinder what you're doing?
Well, I mean, I'll ask one of the guys in a second, but certainly that's one of the trials that are going on through World Rugby at the moment. So I'm not sure which nation's trialing it, but Sarah, from your point of view, what's your sort of...
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's one that's been bounded around for a little while. I know I've heard it in the past and have been asked that question before. To be honest with you, and until we do trials and until we look at what that potentially could bring to the game, we don't really know. And I think it's going to be a question that's unanswered until we get to that point. Absolutely. I'm open to any sort of trials within games if that's going to make it better for the players and for everyone involved. But we've got to remember that we're there to facilitate a game. So whether there's two of us or not, it's got to be based around our knowledge and the way in which we apply what we know. So if there's two of us, maybe if it works, then fantastic. If it doesn't, then that's fine. We've had a trial of it. But for me, I think it's just one of those questions that's got to be answered via trials rather than kind of casting an opinion just yet.
Yeah, great stuff. And so the second question I'll ask to Luke, I'll keep the questioner anonymous just in case. But he's asked for any advice that you have or that you've used for coping with assessors who might be a bit fixed in their ways about where you should stand on your positioning when they're giving you feedback. Anything you've done that could be advice for this referee?
It's always interesting to hear various people's views. I think there is a stigma attached to when we hear advice from assessors to say, oh, they're a bit stuck in the past, they haven't refereed for years. But everyone, including Sarah and I and Patsy tonight, have offered an opinion, and it's just another opinion. So, the more information you can get and actually try it, if it doesn't work for you, well, that's fine. But there's a way of, as we all know, there's a way of being responsive to people who are just trying to help you, and that's all the advisors and assessors are trying to do, is trying to get the best out of you as a referee. So rather than sometimes saying, no, that doesn't work for me, just sample it, give it a go, and if it doesn't, well, then when the next assessor says, well, I should actually standing here, well, you say, well, yeah, I gave that a go, but I ended up giving 3 wrong penalties. It doesn't work for me, and people understand that. Yeah.
And I think a conversation is an important thing, isn't it, at the end? And both sides should be listening to each other's views and opinions for it to be an effective development conversation.
The one thing we miss at the higher end of the game, of the higher level of game, is the chat in the bar. There's nothing better than going into the bar after your shower and getting in the clubhouse and having a drink and a bite to eat and chatting to players and to coaches and to assessors and some supporters, because that's where you actually learn and that's where you develop. And hopefully those chats are still ongoing. That's something we've got to try and bring back into the professional end, because we're really missing that potential learning environment there.
Great stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Dave. We've just had one more clip come through, which is for Sarah to comment on. So I'll play it on and just see what Sarah's view is.
At the moment, Baker come up quickly, and that left a little hole for Otter to run through. Of course, that's really
not quite as bad as Lukey's and ended up with stitches in my eye, but yeah, look, I think this is a prime example of just being human, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, touching back on my point of I like to get quite close, I got far too close here and actually cost a turnover to France. So it was an important and valuable learning point, as funny as it is, and I don't know if you can hear the noise that I make that goes with it.
Yeah.
But you can't get that close and you can't get in the way of those offloads, because unless you're going to be a support runner and you're going to take that ball in for a crash ball, get out of the way, because the players need that opportunity to offload and have that clear offload without you being in the way. And also the defensive team need to have that opportunity to be able to defend that. And I think in this clip, I'm a prime example of stopping both sides do both things, and then I turn the ball over. So it's not great, but we all get in the way, unfortunately. And this was a World Cup final as well. So,
oh, right, you don't save it for the small games. No, but no worries. Guys, we've just done over an hour, so I mean that's flown by for me, and I know we've covered an awful lot, and there's a whole lot more that we could cover. I would just like to say thank you to both of you for giving up your time this evening. Really, really appreciate the insight that you've given, and also some of the processes and thoughts behind it, of how you practice and how you try to make sure that you facilitate that game as for the players who are on the pitch with us. So thank you, Sarah, for your time this evening, and also thank you, Luke. David?
Yeah, thank you both again. It's been great. There's been some brilliant questions that have come in, so thank you very much to everyone who's participated. It's been a really good hour. Just on the screen there, hopefully you can see the topics that are coming up. So next week we've got a session with Professor Richard Cheetham, who's going to look at how we can embed some of this practice, some of this learning that we've taken during this lockdown period into our coaching and refereeing practice. The following week, on June the 2nd, we've got John Mitchell, who's going to be leading a session on the breakdown. And then that second week of June is Scrum Week. We've got Wayne Barnes and Matt Carley on the Tuesday doing a session on refereeing the scrum. And then on the Thursday, we've got Ian Peel, Saracens forwards coach, leading a session on coaching the scrum. So details about these next sessions, registering for these next sessions will come out in due course. Hopefully you'll see the registration link for next week's session in the next day or two, and they'll be on Twitter and our other social media channels. A couple of other things just to highlight. If you look on the resources tab, you'll see that we have posted one of our whistle stop videos on positioning that can give you a bit of further advice. There's a survey that we'd really like you to have a look at and fill in if you have time, please. It's giving your thoughts on some of the issues that we may face in getting rugby up and started again. we've had 10,000 responses so far, which is fantastic. But the more we can get, the better data we can work with and information we can work with to get the game going again. And then just the final thing, there's a link there to the UK Coaching Mental Health and Wellbeing Awareness in Sports e-learning course. That's UK Coaching are now offering that free until the end of August. So it's a great time to engage with that training, because I'm sure there will be some challenges in that area for dealing with, in relation to dealing with our participants as we get back through this period. So thank you very much for joining again. Thank you to Michael, to Sarah and to Luke. And we hope to see you next week. Stay safe. Thank you.